Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Virginia City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. There's a new time change. We're starting this meeting at 8 a.m. I'll call this meeting to order. All members are present. Today's date is Tuesday, October 1st, 2019. We do have a full agenda this morning, and I'll turn the agenda over to our city administrator for consultant Britt C. Bennis. Britt?
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is an appearance by Mike Jarek of Jarek & Associates regarding our contract for lobbyist services. As you recall, the contract expired yesterday, so if we were to renew our contract, we need to do that today. So, Mike, please come on up.
Good. Mr. Jarek, there's a light there. It should be green button. If it's red, turn on the green. Thank you. And welcome, Mr. Jarek, to the City Council Committee of the Whole meeting. And the reason we asked you here today was there were some questions about the contract. It does expire. We had some discussion about information that's been be disseminated with respect to the services you have provided professionally to us for the last couple of years. So we ask that you give us a little introduction and some background information, and then maybe the city councilors may have some questions. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you. My name is Mike Jarek with Jarek & Associates. Our firm has been around for probably 38 years. I've been with them for the last 13. Cover all areas at the Capitol. Try to stay away from healthcare because that gets a little dicey, long. We have represented you, I think, for about 3 years and secured money for the Miners Memorial Project, the sales tax, the Highway 53 bridge relocation of utilities. I don't know if you have any questions.
And I think that your contract began at $3,000 a month. It carried over to $3,000 a month. And my understanding is that if we were to approve your contract today, Mr. Jarek, that the same monthly stipend is what you've agreed to was again no change in the monthly cost for your services. Is that correct?
Are correct.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll go around the room, ask some questions, and I'll preface this by saying that I know the council has asked for some updates and information from you for what you've accomplished and like milestones over the last couple of years, depending upon what you've been working on. I must say that I would take responsibility for maybe the perception there was a lack of communication, because I know that your firm has been communicating regularly with myself and our city administrator, and as the mayor, I just took it upon myself to try to encapsulate all the information that you sent, all the emails, all the phone calls into one kind of package, and then try to report that back at the committee, the whole city council meetings, and trying to keep the city council informed of the activities moving on. But I think the council, in some respects, will be a little more comfortable in some updates directly from you through our city administrator and our city clerk. So that being said, we'll move on to anybody who has a question from the city council. And Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. So the mayor kind of summarized what it was. I've been on the council now. This is going to be ending my third year, and I could not find an email or update from Jarek & Associates anywhere. When this was presented to us last week, we were informed there was a deadline and we had to hurry up and do this. And upon further research, there is no deadline to register lobbyists. It's 5 days within the employment date. So that was one of the concerns to me, is that why we had to hurry up and get this done. I totally, and I get the lobbying process. I understand the importance of a lobbyist. This was never for me an anti-lobbyist campaign. It was about getting what we're paying for. For $36,000, that's a lot of money for the city to be employing another employee, hoses for the fire department, ammo for the police department, that kind of stuff. And I also was not opposed to Jarek and Associates specifically. When the council did not vote, when we voted not to renew your contract, the next motion was to put out an RFP to ask people to, and what you've done in the last week, or what your company has done in the last week, is all I was asking for. It was only to get some information and to make sure that you're doing the best for our city. That's my job as an elected official. I did not make that decision on my own in the dark. I had talked to staff. I have been listening to what staff say over the last 3 years. And a major part of it really is the communication. And I appreciate, Mayor, what you said about trying to summarize, and I totally understand that, but it's, when a citizen asks me what you're doing, and all I have is a few words at the end of a council meeting about moving forward and doing a good job, that doesn't help me. In the last week, we've gotten several emails through Britt about what you've worked on, what you've done for the state, what you've done for other communities, and that's all I was looking for. I truly, it's my job to make sure that we're spending appropriately, and it's unfortunate that it took us saying no to get all that information in a manner that was trackable. I guess that's what I'm looking for, is that in 10 years, when someone says, why is Jarek and Associates still your lobbyist 10 years later, I want to be able to point to the information that says this is why. Spoke with Chief Lewis earlier this week, and with, again, information that we didn't have before, and it's impressive. It is. And I understand that your lobbying work affects a portion. Other lobbyists do stuff. It's not a one-person show. It's not, you are not solely responsible for everything that's happened in the city in the last 3 years. However, you're a part of a puzzle or a part of a team that's doing it, and I respect that, and I really appreciate having that information now. Because just like the 7 of us sitting here, it's a team effort, and we don't always have to agree, and we all do things a little bit differently, and we all have a different point of view, and that's what makes us successful as a council and as a city. So I really appreciate you taking the time to come up today and talk to us. I really appreciate the emails we got over the last week, and I would hope that as we move forward, those regular emails will come. And I don't expect stuff weekly or even monthly, but a quarterly report of generals, met with these people. This is some progress. This is a few of the challenges. That's also helpful to know what your challenges are when we're seeking, especially funding for a public safety center. It's something that we are in desperate need of, and if there's ways we can help, or we can motivate. The mayor comes down and visits regularly. I don't know that I've ever had an invitation to come down and visit, or to have you come up. I believe this is the first time your company's been up here. So those are the kinds of things that I hope as we're moving forward we can remedy, and the communication will get better. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. Anybody else that'd like to speak on that regard? Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you very much for coming up. I really do appreciate that. And the emails that we've received over the last week have been extremely helpful. Hopefully the city hall's not going to get knocked over too. But it's been really nice for us to see the work that your firm has done. And that's where I was coming from as one of the no votes, was that there was just not a real, I guess there was just a lack of communication from my perspective. And one of my questions would be, when other cities hire your firm, do you normally give updates to that city, or who would be your normal contact person?
It all depends. Sometimes it's the city administrator, usually. Sometimes it's through the mayor.
And are those email forums or phone conversations, or?
Both.
Both, okay. So I guess I would agree with Counselor Johnson, if it's possible to have maybe some quarterly,
Whatever you
not
want.
necessarily monthly, but just some quarterly, just so that, like when we get newsletters from Rams, they're real engaged in the region and what they're doing for the region. Just things like that that would make us aware of the work that your firm is doing on behalf of our city. So that would be one request that I would have.
Willing to come up here and do presentations. It's a little difficult during session.
Sure, understand, sure.
During session, I'm regularly communicating with.
I mean, I don't know if that's reasonable, but I guess
would
that was
be-
thrown
no,
out there.
That would be
So,
fine. I mean, we have clients who every month want an update, and it's usually just a half-page thing.
sure. And then I have one other question on a procedural matter is when the motion to deny Jarek and Associates, and now we're at this point, what needs to be done in order to move forward on the behalf of the council?
If we want to continue the contract, we'll need a motion to approve the contract for another year, starting today.
And is that something that, I remember like in one of our past things, one of the people that voted no, or is it the person that actually made the motion? What is the procedure? Does it have to be brought up by the no vote?
Yes, but yeah, if you're rescinding, but I think if it's a no vote, then yes, the person would have to bring it up, but it did pass. It was approved last time.
Right, so we can just start all over again.
Just to start all over, yeah. At the
So the
meeting, it was-
procedure is to start over? Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Once again, I just say that it was, I take responsibility for that, for the communication issue, for the need for more information from your firm, because I was responsible to make sure that the council was informed about that. And so they needed more information, and they'll be receiving more information. We'll change the process by which the communication piece comes from our lobbying firm in order to accommodate the need for information for the individual councilors, getting directly information from your firm as opposed to coming through the mayors who all get the same information at the same time. I think that's proper protocol moving forward as we address the contract for services. Councilor Beyondich.
Morning, thank you. I also am fairly new here, so I'm still learning the process of how we do things. And I think it's very helpful for you to be here and to get familiar with who is representing us. And I'm also happy to report he stayed at the Quality Inn and gave it a good report. So that was very nice, a nice piece of information, but I appreciate it that you came and spoke to us, and so we are able to get that information when we need to make hard decisions. So thank you for coming.
I will communicate however you guys decide, whatever quarter, monthly.
And if I may, just for a couple of minutes, we as a council, we try to come to a consensus on all matters involving the city. We all have in our DNA as elected officials, so to speak, a desire and a dedication, a determination to make sure that we do make decisions in the best interest of the city. And it takes a little give and take as we move forward with that. So I think it's important and it's imperative that we make the right decision. And it's like for all of us, it's all hands on deck, for our projects. We use our state legislative representatives to help move. We use our influence with the IRRB and other people within the community that have some ability to, some influence of some sort. And so to carry our specific projects forward, we determined there was a need to have a lobbyist firm. And our prior city operations director obviously recommended you, and after vetting out of a lot of lobby firms, we selected you because of your history of being a lobbyist for 38 years, and also for the results that you've gotten from other communities by talking to some of your other clients, Carl Sanderson, R.J. Reynolds, all these other places that have Corn Growers Association, that have had you as a lobbyist for decades. And that says a lot to me, and that said a lot to us at the time when we first heard and hired you as our lobbyist firm. And I'll say for $3,000 a month, I think we're getting our big bang for our buck. Yes, that's a lot of money, I agree. But looking at what the other lobby firms charge, I'm happy to say that we're very fortunate to be able to have the expertise of your firm at this point in time for a very reasonable cost. And so once again, I'm going to reiterate the fact that the communication piece wasn't a result of your lack of communication. It was a result of my apparently not giving enough information to the council that would satisfy what they need to answer to their constituents. So that will change, obviously. So, and after talking with some of the legislators and some of the others, and I think some of the councilors had an opportunity to speak with maybe some of the legislators, our fire chief and elsewhere, about, what is our next step moving forward, and how can we best be successful in moving toward our 2020 goal of trying to obtain some funding source for our public safety building. So like I said, it's all hands on deck. You're one of the pieces that will work for us specifically as opposed to regionally. And so we're hoping that, we'll continue to be successful moving forward. So that being said, does anybody else have anything? Councilor Friedli.
I just thank you again for coming up here, Mike. I appreciate it. One of the legitimate concerns I think that was brought up in the conversation when we talked about renewing the contract was whether or not Jarek and Associates was appropriate lobbying firm that would see us through a public safety building type of endeavor, and whether or not we should be looking for lobbying groups that may have specific detailed experience in public safety building acquisition, so to speak. And so I think that was legitimate to consider that. And I don't need you to necessarily enumerate all the public safety projects that maybe Jarek and Associates has been involved in, but that's obviously our kind of laser focus with regard to what we need up here. And so any kind of contacts that you have with like Mary Murphy and those people with regard to our public safety efforts, that's what's important to us. And so hopefully, and I'm assuming that you do, and I know that you're sitting there with Chief Lewis, and there's been ongoing conversations with regard to this already, so the preliminary groundwork, I think, is already underway, and I appreciate that. So that's kind of where we're at with you, and thanks again for coming up here.
Thank you. Councilor Bearable.
Thank you, and fellow councilors, I appreciate very much, Mike, you coming up today. I've done some research since the last meeting. I've done some networking with people that deal with you and stuff down at the state level. And one of the things that has come out of this is the fact that you work across the aisles with both Democrats and Republicans to get things done. And that's very impressive in this day and age with all the stuff going on and bickering that goes on between parties. But they've all said that, the ones I've spoken to, a couple of them have been legislators that I've spoken to, and they said the networking with going across the aisle is so important to get stuff through when it comes to bonding issues. You have to have both sides of the equation to pass these things, because you got a split house right now. You got a House that's Democrat, and you got a Senate that's Republican. So you have to have combination to get these things through. And you have worked very diligently, I've been told, to do these things down there. And that's very important to me as a city councilor, because I don't care what party it is, you gotta get the stuff done. Also, everybody's concerned about the cost of the lobbying. I'm also the liaison to the RAMS Association, Range Association, Municipalities and Schools for the city. We're paying the same, in fact, a little bit more, not much, but just, I think ours is about 36.5 for the same services for a year for Rams, and it's a big lobbying organization, so the money is reasonable. So just wanted to put that out there, that you're in the ballpark as far as I'm concerned for dollars. Thank you for coming up.
And I gotta say, I've been down at the legislators level many times, and also been down to many of the fundraisers that your firm has invited me to come down to, not at the city expense, at personal expense, because it is a fundraiser, so no city funds are being disseminated with respect to that. And I found at each one of those events, I've had the opportunity, you've introduced me to a variety of legislators and significant donors to these particular candidates for whatever causes that you are pursuing. And I must say that every single one of them I've been down to, and I've been to several of them, I don't know how many, but quite a few, whether I'm there for an hour, whether I'm there for, the whole duration. The fact is that every one of those things, you talked about the public safety building, whether the fundraiser for the Democrats or was a fundraiser for a Republican, whether it was a fundraiser for Governor Walz, Senator Bach, Representative Kurt Daudt. It didn't make any difference if they're Republican or Democrat. You lobbying for our project. And so when you talk to these people, and you introduce me as the mayor of Virginia, and you talk about they need a public safety building, the city council is behind them 100%. We have so you've articulated that at your fundraisers, and I think that's imperative and important. And the monies that are disseminated through these fundraisers, through whatever groups you have, far exceeds what we pay you on a monthly basis. So I think we're getting our big bang for buck. From my perspective, I've had the fortune and opportunity to be able to see it, right? And so I think it's just more imperative that the city council has the opportunity to be as formed as they possibly can. So moving forward, I think, I think we're going to get a big bang for a buck from my perspective. Councilor Beyondich. Councilor Barnzelli.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay.
Good morning, Mike. Thank you. I want to thank you for coming up here. And I believe we're getting our money's worth by hiring you. So keep up the good work.
Thank you, Councilor Barnzelli. Councilor Beyondich.
Thank you. So while you're up here, do you have a brief update on how things are going?
Well, I mean, we're a lot of fundraisers. In the House, we'll need at least 8 Republican votes, at least to move a bonding bill forward. So the way session broke out last year, where the Democratic House and the Republican Senate left their counterparts in the opposite party out of negotiations, Republicans are going to have a lot more to say on a bonding bill than in the House than a lot of people think. So it's be a slippery slope. But the good news is we have a big surplus and interest rates are low, so we should have a very large bonding bill in theory. We'll have to see how the politics breaks out. That's things we work on every day.
And I think if the misnomer is that if one party doesn't put forth a bonding bill, it's dead. But either party, whether it's the Democrat-controlled House or the Republican-controlled Senate, whoever the chairperson of their bonding committee can actually submit a bonding bill. Is that correct? And so when that happens, you've been working both sides. I try to get everybody to get the 8 Republican votes. We have Democratic elected representatives that are working for us in that regard too. So try to work together. And I know that you work with Senator Tomassoni, and you've met on a number of cases with Representative Lizagard. So it's a team effort trying to move this project forward. And as Mary Murphy said, Representative Murphy, that if there's a big bonding bill, we'll consider $10.39 million. If there's not, it's going to be something less than that. That's from progress made from last bonding session to where we're at today. And I give credit to three entities. Chief Lewis, our Democratic representatives up here, and Jarek and Associates. Those are the three that have been instrumental in moving the ball off toward a potential funding source for our public safety building. So thank you. Councilor Johnson.
Mayor, I think that's maybe something for you to understand from my point of view, is in this room, we're city councilors. We're not Democrats, we're not Republicans, we're not independents, we're city councilors. The way we do things here locally is different than the way things are done at the state capitol. And so sometimes we, in our naivety and in our experience, want things done the way they should be done. And so when they're playing political games at the state capitol, that's frustrating for me, and I'll only speak for myself, because here we figure it out and we make it happen for the good of our citizens and of the region. And so occasionally, when we're playing with two different systems, that becomes a giant frustration for us, for me. And I want, I do have the ability to chat with people and make connections with people also. And I think sometimes gets forgotten on our level, is that we too have relationships, all of us, with people, and we all have the ability to influence, and we all have the ability to ask questions. And so when things stagnate at the state capitol and we don't have the information, I can't call up Representative Sandstead and say, hey Julie, what's going on? And have her say, and she said this to me, I didn't know there was a problem. And so when we don't have the information we need, we can't make those connections to help also, whether it be at the county level or the state level or other cities. One of the biggest concerns we've heard is, why aren't any of the other cities helping to pay for this regional public safety center? Well, that's because they've always gotten it for free. So what can we do to help support that? Can we as counselors and staff go to another council and say, hey, we need your help? And they'll say, well, we don't have any money. Well, can you put that in a letter saying you support the system, but you don't have any money? Would that be helpful? Those are the kinds of things that we can help too, because we're the ones that have the passion about getting this public safety center built. We understand that the 110-year-old wiggling floor. We understand the mold in the police department also. So I would ask that if in the future, that if there's things that we can do that come in those reports, so that we can help you on our level make things happen too, because we are also their constituents, and they have a tendency to listen to us as much as they listen to lobbyists. I've done numerous trainings. I'm involved in multiple nonprofit lobbying organizations, and that's the one thing we hear regularly is, you need to bring your citizens in and talk, not just the lobbyists, not just the political officials, citizens. So whatever we can do to help too, I would offer that. Whatever I can do, I'm not going to speak for everybody. Whatever I can do to help, I would also offer that up and would be willing to do what I can.
I would encourage all of you to contact your, have your constituents contact them too on the importance of the public safety building, because phone calls, emails work. They do get kind of edgy. I really do need to push this. Not only competing for money, from this pool of money it's a competitive process, and you like to win, and you're also competing with money going to CHISM, and a lot of legislators, they look at that northeast corner of the state and say, all right, well, we gave money for this, but money already went up, $5 million went here. Why should we give you, $30 million? You have to basically try to say it's kind of needs over wants. I see the public safety building as a need, not just something that's just that we can have in town. Really, there is a necessity. I mean, the building is 110 years old and it's crumbling. When you have to store important equipment off-site, that's safety of your citizens is in jeopardy. Have a full-time staff that has to live there, and you can't even live there. That's the things that we try to tell these legislators, and hopefully that was on the bonding tour that was brought up. Realize that there is a real.
And thank you both for that, Mike. I think what Counselor Johnson, all of us indicate that it's important for us all to be involved in this process as individual counselors, as the people we mentioned before. And I was remiss in not saying that we have a Friends of Public Safety that have been very active in writing letters and campaigns and sending the phone calls, emails, and as you had indicated, it does help. It has helped. It brought Senator Tomasoni to that meeting. It brought Representative Liz Lagarde to that meeting. It's bringing us closer together, and we have to exercise leadership and consensus moving forward with whatever specific project we have. And like you said, we want to win. And we don't win because we just want something built. We want to win because it's for our community, and we need that. So it's like you said, this public safety building is in need, and that's what we've been touting all along. Councilor Paulson.
Mayor, with all that has been discussed, I mean, I believe that my concerns have been addressed and satisfied. And I appreciate this dialogue, and I appreciate the conversation that I was able to have with our police chief, and just kind of bringing everything together, pieces of information that possibly maybe we didn't have prior. So I thank you so much for that. And if it's allowed at this time, I would be prepared to make a motion to renew the contract for Jarek and Associates. And is there do I have to rescind? Don't have to. Because it was not, okay, that was my procedural question. So, and with that, maybe the addendum in there for the communication piece would be something I would look for as a change to the original contract. But I do appreciate you coming and just, kind of solidifying that the work that is being done is from continued relationships on both sides of the aisles, and how important that is, that, we want to win, and it's a necessity, it's not a want. So thanks so much for that.
Okay, moved by Councilor Paulson to renew the contract for Jericho Associates with an addendum for periodic updates based upon need, and is supported by Councilor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Councilor Baraboo.
I would think we should, that addendum for reporting should be minimally quarterly. Would that satisfy the rest of the council? If they want to do it more often, fine, but minimally, we should have a report quarterly.
Or quarterly or as requested? Would that be okay? So if you need it earlier, we can disseminate?
I'll amend my motion to quarterly or as requested.
Thank you. Motion by Councilor Paulson to clarify quarterly or as needed, and the support is amended by Councilor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Jarek.
I'm going to jump over number 2 because I think I forgot to tell George that the meeting moved to 8 a.m. So we will go down to Matt Reed. So I think George will be here at 9. So we'll go down to number 3. Since Matt did make it, Matt did get the notice, the meeting changed to 8 a.m.
And Councilor Baraboo, if there's a motion that needs to be done, would you take care of that? I just want a few minutes with Mr. Jarek. Thank you.
Hi, Matt.
Morning. Item number 3 is similar to the request that came through a couple of weeks ago on the other project. This one's for the Midway Drive project. And I guess as far, they're essentially requesting a 3-week extension. The completion date, the substantial completion date was last Friday. They're not done. They're working, I mean, they're trying. So, I mean, it's not like they've pulled people off site or anything, they're trying. So they're looking for, I think it was October 18th. Was the 3-week extension they were looking for. I believe if the weather will cooperate with them, I think they'll be all right. They'll get there. I haven't heard an update yet this week, but the plan was to start pouring curb for the remainder of the project this week. They did get that south end blacktopped here a week or so ago, so they're making progress. The pipe work is all done. So, I mean, they're getting there. So I guess at this time, I can answer any questions, or if you guys want to have some discussion on this, we can do that. One thing I maybe should point out is one difference in this discussion versus what happened at the last one. As you recall, I was coming up with the last one with some additional costs for us, right? Well, I did check this morning, and we're getting darn close on Midway Drive too. So we're kind of in that same position. We've again been able to stretch our budget as far as we can possibly stretch it. We've gone a lot of weeks, 6 days a week instead of 5, so we're doing good in that respect, but we're getting close again. So I think my recommendation to the council would be the same as last time, where you would not grant the extension at this time. Let's see how it plays out. And that doesn't mean that you are locked into having to do any kind of liquidated damage assessment or anything. You can make that decision at any time, but once you grant that extension, you negate that ability to do that. So that would be my recommendation to the council. I'm not suggesting that you should or should not assess liquidated, or would even have the need to at this point, but keep your options open, I guess. That would be my recommendation.
Steve?
Thanks. That was my first question, is it going to cost us more with you? So I do appreciate that your recommendation is not extend the contract. I think that is a good precedence for us to follow and really encourage our contractors to be looking ahead and be more realistic in their time frame. You know, I would rather award a contract that a 6-week project and they're guessing 8, and they give themselves 2 extra weeks to start with, knowing our weather and our conditions, because like you said, we're leaving our options open. So just for the sake of discussion, I will make a motion to not extend the contract at this time.
Okay, hearing that, is there a second to that motion? Councilor Freelib supports that motion. Any further discussion? Just raise your things because I can't see any of them. Councilor Martinzelli.
Thank you, Charlie. Mayor.
Assistant Mayor, whatever.
I would like to extend this for 3 more weeks. It's rained ever since they've been here. I know every contractor has that same problem. But in this place, on Midway there, the homeowners on the south end of that road live there. How can they, I don't see how we can not let them have 3 more weeks to finish this project. And how long is that whole road? That's a half a mile or more, isn't it, from the Dairy Queen south to Bergen Road?
Maybe for some clarification, Councilor Baranzelli, by not extending, that doesn't mean they're going to stop working.
I understand.
So, okay, so they are required to finish the contract regardless. So extending the contract for them right now not extending the contract isn't hampering their abilities to get the project done in any way. So they would still get it done this fall either way. That makes sense?
Yes. you
Okay,
bet.
maybe I'm not understanding where you're,
I understand.
okay,
Thank you.
okay, you're welcome.
And Matt, I'd like to point out that the contract was supposed to start in June, and they didn't start work till July. So I think a lot of this, and Casper's a great company, I've worked with them before on other projects. A lot of it was their delay. They started later than they should have.
Yep, and they've admitted that many times. They ran into some issues in the spring and got started a little later than they anticipated. So, and Casper, to be clear, Casper is a good company. Again, see where it plays out, and the work that they've done so far has been good, so the workmanship is fine.
Now, this is the pertinent thing to do right now because it leaves the penalty phase in place in case something goes haywire in the next 3 weeks here. So with that, any further discussion? Anybody else? Julianne?
Thank you. The question that I had, I guess, is probably on to number 4. The savings of that $8,400 or $8,800, with the penalty assessed, does that go directly onto them then?
Okay, so just to be clear, let's talk about that real quick. That actually it's a decrease to the contract, but it was money that was still spent. This is sort of a wash it out, make it even.
It
'cause-
is, that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah, so originally, we had them bid excavation, hauling, and disposal of contaminated soils. In the process, the way the paperwork shuffles, it comes back through the city to get permission, or from the landfill to get permission to take it there. And the city authorized direct payment from the city to the landfill. So we're removing whatever the city has already paid from Casper's bid. So essentially, all you're doing by doing this particular decreased change order is evening yourself out.
So it was more of a wash because that
It's a
same
wash.
8,800 was spent?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And then in terms of the, I guess, declining of the extension, will that bill increase to the city then if they continue on further than even that?
That would end up, I believe, coming back to the council again if we have to extend again a second time. With looking at this forecast, they're going to have maybe a tough time in 3 weeks because it's going to rain all this week, so.
That's,
I think to your question.
But they do
Council-
get rain days, so that tacks on in the end, so it'll go past 3 weeks if they're with the rain days.
It's not a calendar day contract, it's a completion date contract. But you're asking, I think, about potential additional costs. I'll know more in 2 weeks.
okay.
Because
thanks for
I
that.
know where our budget sits right now, and it depends on how far they get, so I'll know more in a couple weeks here.
Okay, with that, any further discussion? Hearing none, we have a motion on the floor with a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. And then item number 4 again is the contract decrease. Matt?
Would move the resolution for the change order for the decrease.
Is there support? Counselor Johnson made the motion, and Counselor Barnzelli supported. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Aye. Motion carries.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt. With that, turn it back over to Britt.
Thank you. And I see Chief Lewis left. The next item on the agenda will go to number 5, review the 3-year service agreement with ProCare Services Stryker for the power load cot maintenance in the amount of $36,571.51.
Okay. What is this actually for? Is this not the generic,
No, this is the cots, the power load cots that we have in the ambulances. This is the maintenance plan for the cots.
The ones that
Think
do
of
the
them
power.
like, kind of think of them like hydraulic lifts. They're all their own separate hydraulic lift, and they all need to be inspected and maintained every year.
okay, very good, thank you.
Yeah, they're all power lift, so that don't hurt our ambulance people's backs and stuff, so.
I see, okay. And this is for the fire department, right? Okay, very good. Counselor Johnson?
This is budgeted also, I'm guessing?
I'm gonna have to check into that.
They are, these are an essential tool for the fire department, absolutely 100%. I've ridden on them, I've seen them in action, I've actually gotten to use one. So I would just, my only thing would be to if this is not a budgeted item, that it really should be, I don't know how in the weeds the budgets get, but this maintenance should be budgeted in because it's definitely needed, and we're saving thousands of dollars a year in insurance claims and workman's comp claims by utilizing these. I will make a motion to accept the contract at this time, but would ask that we make sure it's a budgeted item moving forward.
I would like to clarify, the total, that is the total for the 3-year contract, it's $12,190.50 per year. So that is the total for the 3 years.
Where it's about $1,000 a month. So, yes, move that forward.
Moved by Counselor Johnson, is there support?
All support for more discussion.
Support by Counselor Bearable for more discussion. Just one quick thing. Is this the first 3-year contract we've had with them? Is this the first 3-year contract? The second three-year contract, thank you. Further discussion, Counselor Bearable.
Yeah, those power lift cots are really expensive, and this includes repairs and everything on it with this maintenance contract. So it's well worth the dollars we're going to spend on those. As Steve is correct, Counselor Johnson is correct. If we have one injury or a couple injuries and we have people out with work comp or stuff, we're going to end up paying one way or the other.
Okay, thank you. Moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. And George, I must apologize. We moved the meeting to 8 and I forgot to notify you, but if you're ready, we're ready for you. Item number 2, George Eilertson, Northland Securities, financing for energy improvement upgrade project. And this would be the Amoresco project. Good morning, George.
Good morning, George.
Green is good. Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Sorry about. I'm sorry. It's all me, Britt. So energy efficiency improvements. That's now, Britt. I'll just have to ask how much made it into the packets for the meeting.
I did put everything in there.
Okay.
So they do have all the information.
All right. So admittedly, council, this is something that certainly discussion and then get direction from you this morning. Back in 2008, this kind of rang a bell for me when Britt talked about energy efficiency improvements. We did bonds back in 2008 with the city that for a couple purposes. One was cupola repair on City Hall, and the other was energy efficiency improvements at the ice arena. And so what the city has, and I've run this by your bond attorney with Freiberger Buchanan, is the city has the ability to do general obligation charter bonds. So as part of your charter, you've got the ability to do improvements for projects like this, for energy efficiency improvements, and no need for an election, for example. It does count towards your statutory debt limit, but there is no other special provisions that you might see in other bond issues. So there is the ability to do general obligation charter bonds. I did put together a preliminary financing timeline, and again, completely open for discussion. My assumption was that with the miners project, well, the ice arena project, the MEC project coming very likely in 2020, so the financing for that there might be the potential to do this financing yet in 2019. And so the benefit of doing it in 2019 would be that you can still do the bonds bank qualified. There was a meeting a couple months ago where Mia Thibodeau from Freiberger Buchanan came up when we were talking about the hospital and the benefits of doing bank qualified versus non-bank qualified debt. And so that is the approach with the timeline that I took, is trying to get the bonds issued and closed in 2019. Of course, the project's got to be ready and to be at that stage where you are all supporting moving ahead with the financing. Nonetheless, Britt gave me some parameters to work with here, which is the overall project cost of roughly $2.4 million. We've got a scenario which was reviewed by the Public Utilities and preferred by them of a cash contribution of $1,063,000 by them, resulting in a bond issue amount of a little bit over $1.4 million. And the other parameter to work with then is the targeted annual debt service payment, which right around $106,000, $108,000 per year. And so what we've got in your packets is a financing term that meets those parameters. So it achieves the financing need and it achieves the annual debt service requirement. So now what I've got in the steps, there's a calendar that I put together in your packets that, again, just gives some suggested steps or suggested dates that we could work with that would achieve closing on this financing by the end of the year. The first step being at your city council next week, which there's a resolution in that packet that we call a parameters resolution. Just because we'd be dealing with some timelines that are, getting a little bit close here at the end of the calendar year, a parameters resolution allows your administrator and your mayor to lock in the financing on any date, provided that you've got your credit enhancements in place and provided that you've got your bond offering documents together. So that would be, again, something for consideration at next week's city council meeting. We would work with Standard & Poor's, and again, I'd review this with your staff, but we'd work with Standard & Poor's on the assignment of a bond rating. That, of course, takes a little bit of time, so we'd be looking at pricing these bonds towards the latter part of November and closing in December. So again, that allows you to do this financing bank qualified. The benefit of that, again, is to get a little bit lower interest rate. Based upon the preliminary numbers that I put together for this financing, we've got an average interest rate of about 2.25%. And so favorable interest rates in the current bond market. And Mayor, members of the council, that's just a really quick overview of one, your charter allows this type of financing. Two, you can, based upon the financing timeline that I put together, get these bonds issued and closed by the end of 2019. Any questions?
Two questions. First, the bond debt itself, how does that affect our current bond ability to bond? How much do we have in our buffer on what we can bond for, and how much would this reduce our ability to bond for future projects?
Very good question. As I referenced, that this counts towards the city's statutory debt limit, and that is 3% of the city's estimated market value. That is a figure that is right around, and I apologize, Mayor, I don't have that as a handout, but you do have approximately $10 million, and I can certainly follow up for next week's city council meeting, have a handout for this as well. You do have about $8 to $10 million of existing statutory debt limit. This would count towards that, like I said, reducing that amount. As I was thinking about that question, the public safety, when you think about a public safety project in the future years, or the coming years.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
This is, that's the kind of debt, very likely, that, and actually another reason why that's a good question, is the general obligation charter bonds that you're looking at here, very likely the public safety financing, if there is a local match needed, or if there is a local financing needed for the city of Virginia doing general obligation bonds, that very likely does count towards your debt limit as well. So, so yes, you can get these energy efficiency improvements done at favorable rates in terms, but it counts towards that statutory debt limit, and you've got another project potentially in the wings here that would count as well. So things to consider certainly is that it's and again, like I said, Mayor and Council, that for your packets for October 8th meeting, I'll put some information in there regarding your existing debt that counts towards that limit, what your capacity is as well. So we can further expand upon that question if you'd like.
Thank you. And I have one more question before we go to Councilor Baraboo. Further public edification. By issuing these bonds, does it have any, does it affect property taxes in the city of Virginia for residential and business property taxes?
Good question. My understanding from working with your administrator is that, for one, you've got the Virginia Public Utilities contribution to buy down the bond issue, so that's part. The other is that you've got VPU is expected to pay the annual debt service. So
A large portion of it.
a large portion of it. Now, these are general obligation bonds of the city, so that what you're saying is that the city stands behind this debt. If there ever is a shortfall in revenue, the city is obligated to make up that difference or to levy taxes to make up the difference. So you just go into it understanding that, and I believe that VPU is, the anticipation is that they would pay a large part of the debt service.
Thank you. I think Councilor Bearabou's light on was first. Councilor Bearable.
George, would we be better off, and this is going to put you right on the spot, would we be better off using the ability of Amoresco to do the bonding, which then wouldn't count against our debt limit, if we use that company to do it, because they've offered to do that? And we're looking at a huge road work, because that's going to count against our statutory limit also, and that's $20 million we're looking at over time. So we're going to exceed our debt limit anyway, unless that is exempt, and I don't know if that is exempt or not. So I'm looking at not to get you not to have the business, but if we look at it, we save ourselves debt limit dollars if we went through Amoresco, because that's outside of our purview, and it's going to get paid the same way through the savings, and the utility is going to contribute the same amount of money, correct, Brett?
I think, and George can jump in here, a bank loan is still a bank loan. It doesn't matter how we finance it, it still counts towards our debt limit.
But we're not financing, Amoresco is financing, correct?
We would still have a debt note on our financials.
No, because if I read their contract right, if something falls short, they're responsible to pick up the differential, correct? So how does that work? That's my question.
Sherry, could you,
Because I'm trying to sneak in the best bang for the buck that the city can get. And nothing against George, but I've been around a long time, and we got to figure out, because if we don't get these streets done, we're in big trouble, because that's what the recipients of the city want done.
Sherry?
George, you probably already have the answer on the edge of your lips, but construction, street construction, that is exempt from this?
Correct. Mayor and council, and good question, Councilor Baraboo. The general obligation improvement bonds, which is what we would utilize for the street projects, those are exempt from the statutory debt limit because of the general rule of thumb is when you've got a secondary source of revenue other than just property taxes to pay debt, then it's exempt from the debt limit. And in the case of a street project, potentially special assessments, revenues of the municipal utilities. So yes, that one is exempt. I will say that I need to do more investigation into the Amoresco financing option. I'll have to look into that. Certainly if there is an option there that is outside of the city's statutory debt limit, again, with the public safety project in mind, that perhaps that is something we should be exploring. So I stand here not knowing all the information on that, so I apologize.
Yeah, reason I'm asking that question, I'd rather see us put that $1.4 million in on street stuff in addition to what we've talked about already for improvement of the streets. If there's a wiggle room around this stuff, and I don't know whether there is or not, so I appreciate you looking into that.
Sure.
Thank you. Councilor Paulson?
Mayor, and this might be a question for Amoresco as well to answer, but from what I recall, there were two projects. Project A is a self-funding project and Project B. And are we talking about the financing of Project B? Because that's what the city would be when we voted for both of those. Is that the obligation, or am I misinformed?
We have to pay the money up front to the contractors, and the payments for the bond that we're going to issue comes from the savings we would get in energy costs.
Right.
B is the one we are looking at.
So B is the one that we need to expend some money on, because A is the self-funding
Correct.
portion of what we approved.
Correct.
And then of that dollars that the public utilities is putting into this, which they will be realizing the majority of those savings,
Correct.
which portion of the project, is it portion A or portion B?
A.
It's A. So that brings down the portion that Amoresco helps us with the self-funding?
No, it's all, What the utilities, basically, we're doing the project. Utilities is going to pay us back.
Okay.
For the savings that they see.
And I'm sorry, I'm just
it's
trying to
okay.
walk this through because then I think at our last discussion, we were told that then it would change that to only 3 years.
13 years that the
Oh,
utility
13.
would pay, yes.
13 it would make, instead of
8 to
20, it
13.
would go to 13?
Yes.
Okay. So then on Project B is really what we're focusing on in terms of bonding. And the total on Project B is
The total Project B is 2.4 million,
2.4.
and the utilities is going to pay 1 million
We're
up
looking at
front.
4.4 in total. I just pulled up Amoresco's thing to try to just kind of walk this back as to what we had this discussion. So Amoresco had pitched that we could go through your company, isn't that correct?
Seek financing, yes.
To seek the financing, but am I misinterpreting
No,
it that?
no. So again, John Neville with Amoresco. Sorry to interrupt.
Sorry, you guys. Sorry about that,
No,
George.
so we could bring to the table a tax exempt lease purchase agreement. That's what we had talked about. So we would, on your behalf, put it out for an RFP and look for competitive rates from various banks and institutions. Now, the rate that I just heard, 2.25, I believe was what I heard. That's a pretty aggressive rate, so that's actually looking pretty attractive. When we put our package together, which was probably a few weeks ago now, we put in a very conservative number of 2.95%. But now that it's dropped down to a 13-year term, that's going to be, we can probably do better than that. And again, it's not through our company. We just go out, look for various financing institutions on the city's behalf. So it's still an option that's available.
And thank you for
yes.
that clarification. I didn't understand that Amoresco would go out for RFPs, so that
Right.
helps clarify that for
In
me.
fact, I forwarded a copy of our document that we typically do that on behalf of.
Thank you, John, appreciate
You
that.
can share the podium. if that's
So
appropriate.
then going forward, George, then the recommendation that you would have would be to continue down the path that you're suggesting with this lower interest rate, and which it wouldn't affect any street and alley project going forward because those do not count against our bond rating.
That is correct. The general obligation charter bonds that I'm presenting this morning do count towards your statutory debt limit, but street projects would not.
That, I appreciate that.
Thank you. Just Sherry wanted to clarify real quick, and then we'll go to Councilor Johnson.
Mayor. First of all, George, thank you for going S&P.
Yes, I want to thank them too for that.
Second, I just want to reassure the council that we already budget $50,000 a year for street lighting. Our payments would roughly be 106, right? 50,000 off of that. I'm telling you, this is going to be peanuts.
Well, in the larger scheme of things, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
I have one related question and then a question about something you brought up. So my related question is, can the two of you work together? I mean, is that a feasible thing where you two should be communicating and?
Oh, yeah, we've already, yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay, good.
Yep, thank you.
Then my other question, you said something about if there is because the streets and alleys have a revenue stream, they don't count towards so as we're looking at the public safety center, if we had a taxing district or a way to generate revenue for that, would then it not count against us moving forward? Is that the logical, not that it can happen or will happen, but could?
Yeah, if we had a taxing district.
Good question about that. That would be a financing that would be actually the same general obligation charter bonds that for public safety improvements that you would be considering for energy efficiency improvements. So it's kind of a broad financing authority that you have. That does count towards the statutory debt limit because the primary source of revenue is taxes. Today, that's the way we would see the public safety project.
Even if we had a taxing district where because right now Virginia covers all the costs for our ambulance. And the dream someday is to have a district that covers Evelyn, Gilbert, Virginia, Mountain Iron, Buell, White Lakes, or where, however it goes, if that were to ever come into fruition, would that change the type of bonds we would need to get for the Public Safety Center because it's a larger area?
That's a good question, because a taxing district potentially would have its own bonding authority and its
Correct.
own bonding limit. So yes, in that scenario, it would be outside of the city of Virginia's borrowing capacity, if you will.
Appreciate that. Thank you for that information.
Thank you, Counselor Johnson. Counselor Bearable.
That brings up another question, George, is that public safety. What if we stay away from a taxing district completely and we look at getting legislation for a subscription from each household that goes toward the public safety for the broad area in the region? That would not be taxable dollars at that point in time. Because you're asking for revenue coming in to cover the service from a subscription service. That's a whole different ballgame. So there's ways we maybe can fudge and do things before this is over with. But our Amoresco gentleman did answer my question. He said that the city would be the obligatory one. So my suggestion, I guess, is wrong. So I think with what George has here with the projected rate, I'm more inclined to go with your recommendation, George, than I am to convolute this whole process and stuff. Amoresco's still going to get their dollars out of this, so in the end.
Okay, and thank you, George. One quick question, if I may, before we go to Counselor Johnson. The concern that I have is the ability to bond for the public safety building, because this has been in the works for a long time. For me, this is the highest priority. So if we move toward, bonding through this energy efficient project, we are going to reach our bonding threshold. If we bond for the public safety building and this, or is that not correct?
It depends on how much we have to bond for the public safety building. Hopefully,
Right.
our lobbyists and legislatures will see the light and give us the 10 million we ask for.
Okay, so I guess the question for you, Britt, as well, and for you, George, and others. So say for the sake of argument, based upon the current, climate down at the legislature, and whether or not, we don't know if it's going to be a large bond bill or not. If it's a large bond bill, maybe we'll get the money. If it's a smaller bonding bill, say for the sake of example, we only get $3 million, just as a sake, and I'm not advocating that here. We want 10.3, and that's what we need. But say they give us less. I mean, and we'd have to bond for $6 million, okay, or 7 million, 7.3 million, whatever. That would get close to our bonding threshold, correct?
Until about the year 2025, and then a lot of the bonds fall off, but.
Okay, so, we will have some wiggle room moving forward a little bit. It might be lean, but we can work that.
Good. I think this is a once-in-a-lifetime project we have, that utility is willing to pay $1 million to finish off our street lighting, and that they're willing to pay a portion of our bond for 13 years. I don't know that we'll ever get this offer again. So I think it's something we should accept and move forward.
Yeah, and thank you, Britt, for clarifying that. I'm fully supportive of it. I'm just looking for what our bonding threshold is going to be. I think we're going to need to bond for the public safety bill. We'll make those adjustments moving forward. As the other bonds drop off, we'll be able to have a little bit more wiggle room. But I think we can't, in my opinion, we can't support one at the expense of the other. So I think we're moving forward with both projects and staying within our bonding capacity and our threshold, and looking at the dynamics of over the next, years, how we manage that. So thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Britt, where are we at with the agreement with the utilities?
Greg French and I spoke yesterday. We are drafting hopefully a one-page document that states that they will pay the $1 million up front for the street lighting, and then a portion of the savings for 13 years, which is the majority portion of the bond payment.
So as we move forward with the motion to move forward with Northern Securities financing include wording about the utilities, or is that two separate?
I would leave it two separate. The bond we wouldn't have the bonds until December, so we wouldn't have the cash until then, so we have a little bit of time for the utilities.
So we can move forward. So I would make a motion to direct staff to continue moving forward with Northern Securities for financing for the energy improvement upgrade project.
Motion by Counselor Johnson.
I'll
Is there
support.
support? Support by Counselor Bearber. Any further discussion? Cherry, did you have any comments you want to make before we vote?
No, I feel confident with this one.
All right, thank you.
Actually, an easy bond.
Okay, thank you. Counselor Bearable?
Yeah, Steve, just to assure you, the utilities already passed through their commission the resolution for this dollar, so it's just a matter of Britt
getting
finishing
it
up and doing the work with Greg French.
Yeah, we just need to see the signed on the dotted line is, right? So, okay, thank you. So it's been moved and supported to authorize Northland Securities to move forward with getting the financing for the bond for the energy upgrades through the Amoresco project. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, John. Thank you, George.
The next,
Any final comments before we move on to the next topic? Sure, please. Please, thank you.
So since it sounds like we've just agreed upon the financing for the project, just a question regarding the contract? I remember at the last
like we
meeting.
talked about, until the financing's in place, that the notice to proceed, I need the council to approve bonding. I need the utility to approve payment with a written document, and then we can notice to proceed at the council meeting, hopefully on the
So
8th.
the contract itself could be signed, and then you simply hold, which is typically what happens. The contract gets reviewed and signed, and then you simply hold the notice to proceed until contingencies are released.
I know myself personally, I don't know that I'm comfortable signing the contract until I have the money in hand, until we know for sure that we are going to proceed with the bond. But that's just, I'm not a vote maker, you guys are the decision makers.
Well, I think that was the recommendation by our council. I mean, by legal counsel, so that we do that. But
So I would be comfortable after the meeting next week, if we do call for a bond hearing at the October 8th council meeting, that we could approve it then?
we approve it then, and then once, then we sign the documents the next day or
Correct.
right after the meeting.
Yeah, and then you simply hold the notice to proceed until everyone's comfortable moving forward with the financing.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank
Very
you.
good.
Thank you very much. Okay. Anything else on this subject? Okay, Britt?
Thank you. Since we have Fire Marshal Chris Clark here, I'm asking if we can move item number 13 up, 13 and 14, review the vacant building registration ordinance. This vacant building registration ordinance is part of what we've been working on with staff, which deals with the rental code, vacant buildings, and also business licensing. So we've been trying to find ways to address these issues, not just with code violations, but also with education and awareness of things that are important and that we want to make sure preserve and maintain life safety issues. So Chris, if you want to come on up too and help me talk about this. The first one, vacant building registration ordinance, would require anybody that has a vacant house for a certain period of time that they have to register it with the city, which would mean they have to give us a name of a person to contact, they'd have to give us information if the utilities are on or off, what they plan to do with the building, is it planned for demolition, are they letting it go tax forfeit? Feel free to jump in, Chris, anytime for anything I'm missing.
And it's been a long time coming.
It's been a long time
Here
coming. We're
we-
not the first
here
city
we
to do
are.
this. We're not the only city to do this. There's many cities that do. It's just time.
And here we are. It's the next step in getting this rental coordinates up to speed and those kinds. So welcome, Fire Marshal Clark. Could you please, give us your perspective on this?
Absolutely. So our first step was the Virginia Property Maintenance and Preservation Code, which we enacted here about a year and a half ago. And so that made our foundation for all properties within the city of Virginia. Moving forward, it was our goal to make these additional ordinances to better our housing and safety and security of the city of Virginia. So the packets you have before you are the three divisions that we have. And city staff has reviewed these packets and have made these recommendations and brought to you, looking to start enacting and moving forward to this. We still have some logistical things to work out on the city side, but moving forward, we can start this process and start the enforcement side of that. As Britt said, there's a lot of education that goes with this, so we're not here to make a large financial impact to these business owners or rental folks, but it's better tracking for us, better pre-planning, better response for the entirety when we are addressed with all of these issues.
So the question, Chris, for me, is we're going to move forward with this vacant building ordinance. There's some enforcement issues there. There's an education piece where once when we approve it, I think we will, when we approve it, then, there'll be a huge education piece to the general public. Maybe have to invite business owners and make it work so that everybody can be having pretty input and understand what this is all about, and other than just sending letters out to everybody, actually have a meeting to explain this entire process. I think that's what we've done in the past. I think this is what we'll do in the future. The question is with respect to the ability to inspect. So say the registration is registered in, so who's responsible, just for the public's education, who's responsible for once this ordinance goes into effect, once the people register, and the individual who's going to be the code official that's going to take a look to ensure there's compliance. And so they go to the registered building and they determine they're in compliance or not in compliance. You make the necessary steps within whatever period of time is to have that repaired, otherwise enforcement action is taken after that. But what about those buildings that they aren't registered and you find that they're not registered? When you notify, is there a time frame within that ordinance that they must register or face the penalty of a fine? Yeah, there is, correct. Okay, so thank you.
Yes.
So that just answers my questions. Thank you, Britt. I'll move to our City Council, Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious to know where the definition of vacant building came from. It seems to be pretty concise, but is that something borrowed from somewhere else, or?
It's a general term throughout the code world.
I'm trying to read it to figure out if I were a landlord with 16 properties, how to get around it being a vacant property if nobody's living there. So
when we looked at that, to answer your question, we did search that, and if you look under dwellings, it addresses buildings not attached to the primary residence, outbuildings, those types of things. So.
Good. And then I skimmed it. I didn't read it word for word. There was a lot to read this week. Is there a reporting process for me as a citizen to let you know that the house next door to me is empty? Is there a process where we can voice concerns?
Currently, we do that through our complaint.
The
There's an
online
online or a written portion or form available.
Perfect. Those are my two questions. Thank you.
And to follow up on Councilor Johnson's question about being able to know, if the neighbors know, in this registration of the vacant building ordinance, so if the person registers the building as vacant, should they be required to post a note on a door in an area that's easy for police, fire, or code officials to see, saying, this building is vacant, it has been vacant since such and such a date, so all the neighbors know that this is a vacant building, and there's a time frame in which, they have to fill this vacancy, or if it's vacant, whatever the time frame is, whatever has to be done. Is that something that's part of this process, or when you do the registration?
That may invite squatters or other vagrants to try to steal the copper or other things out of the buildings.
Good point.
I guess that's a two-part as
Good
well
point.
to tie into that. So the property owner has the ability and responsibility to make sure that the building is secured, whether that's whatever type of boarding that they're using on there, that is designed for this. Whether we place a sign of some sort that just notifies, maybe it's a colored, non-verbal or printed, just a color code, maybe we need to just use something like that. That may be a very good identifier for us to do that.
I would say that if we could find some way to identify, Britt makes a very good point about squatters, but right now, they're resilient. They find a way to find empty buildings in which to move into, and brings to mind is the East West Realty building up on Woodbury Drive, where they've been living there for quite a while, and they actually had an apartment full of acquired furniture, and so, that wasn't posted either, but they found a way to get in there just like they have in the past, but it makes a good point that you don't want, I suppose, if there's a way to just, as an identifier for code officials or for the general public or something like that, just something to think about. No need, I think, changes to be made in the ordinance, but as you're moving forward, it's a thought. Please continue, Chris, thank you. Britt?
Well, I appreciate that, and I think that's going to be helpful for the law enforcement and fire to identify those vacants. So we'll.
And that's the
discuss that,
intent of this
yeah.
ordinance, is so that we're sharing information between the fire, police, and the city, that we all know who is vacant, who to contact if something happens in this building, or if we have an issue. Just makes it much more transparent for all these departments together to identify these issues that we have with these houses.
And so part of the registration for vacant buildings will likely be a registration when the rental code goes into effect too for landlords.
This is one of our steps to the rental code. Like Chris alluded to, the property maintenance code was first. This is our next two steps, this one and the business registration, and then we'll talk about rental.
Thank you, Britt. Councilor Bearable.
Yeah, Chris, I have a couple questions for you. Now, I'm assuming with this vacant building registration, with the steps as the fees move up, will you folks be inspecting those buildings every year then? Or is it a one-time shot and you just collect more money without actually looking inside those buildings?
No, we'll have to have some sort of form of going out and just looking at those properties.
So what about putting these particular lockbox things on there, so you have access and forcing landlords to have, mount one of those that we do with the homeowners and stuff, so if there's an emergency, you can get into their homes? What about getting into those buildings, and also our building inspectors, are they gonna be looking at these buildings for
think we'll
further
be doing-
deterioration?
To address that, I think that might cause some entry issues and so forth, because it is still private property. We still have to go through the channels to do that. So we can do a lot of monitoring from the exterior. And if we need to, then with this registry, we can contact those owners at that time to make those assessments.
What if the owner doesn't respond, what are you gonna do then?
Then we have the ability to apply for administrative warrant to gain access to that. So whether we breach a door or however, that comes at their expense. And if they don't pay those fines or so forth, that can be assessed to their property taxes.
So you will have a lien option for taxes then?
Correct.
Okay.
And just for clarity, a lot of this vacant building will come underneath the building engineering office, and then the other two ordinances will fall more through the fire department's purview.
Okay, so I know there's some legal and constitutional issues about entering private property. Administrative warrant is one. A formal complaint from a tenant is another, or under an emergency circumstance, whether it's a hot pursuit by the car on the police department, somebody goes into that building, they can go in there, or you've considered that by inspecting the exterior, there could be a fire code issue. You get the administrative warrant to go in there if the landowner won't give you permission to go in. Is that correct? And that's kind of the way it is now.
And that follows any of our code enforcement. If
Right.
we feel there's some violation and they're not allowing us, we can apply for administrative warrant for entry.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Paulson?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm looking at subdivision 4 exemptions, item B, snowbirds. Those persons who leave their residential buildings on a temporary basis for vacation purposes or to reside elsewhere during the winter season and have the intent to return are exempt from the registration requirement. Requests for snowbird exemption will be considered annually with proper verification. Could you explain that a little bit?
Britt, feel free to tap in on this one here too, but a lot of the snowbirds will report to the police department that they're leaving. So this is kind of just a checks and balance system for us to allow that. And that sometimes that does change, or that maybe there's children or family or another designated person that is in charge of those properties. Maybe it's a maintenance or a management company that does that. That just allows us to make sure that we're on top of those communication factors.
And then there's no fee for that
Correct, snowbirds wouldn't have a fee.
exemption?
Right.
Okay.
Right.
But in order to communicate, would you say that most people that do snowbird, snowbird, I don't know who that is, communicate directly with the PD or fire department?
Yeah, we don't get a lot from the fire department, but I believe the police
But the
department
PD.
gets a lot, or the sheriff's department for doing these property checks.
Okay, so I just was concerned about how we were going to communicate them to communicate
If
with
we
the
enact
police
this ordinance,
department.
we'll encourage them to just let us know, call the same line that you would call for your registration, just let us know you're a snowbird, you're gonna be gone from this date to this date. And that way we can convey it to the fire and police that this person's gone, here's the number in Phoenix or wherever they're at.
Okay.
And we can get a hold of them there if something happens while they're gone.
Thank you.
And just to follow up in your question, Counselor Paulson, when I worked on the Metro, we had that. That's a plan we had. It was a house check system where we were encouraged by ordinance for people to notify us. We had house check, we had the addresses in the squad cars of all the homes that were going to be vacant and the times in which they were going to be gone, with the times they anticipated to return, so we could all keep an eye on it. Not only police, but fire, maintenance, and most of these snowbirds have neighbors that watch their house, and some of them have systems where if the heat goes down, a red light comes on and they notify the proper thing. So, yeah, I think that just makes sense that we should know, therefore we can help keep that home safe moving forward, so, thank you. Counselor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. To add to that, the city, when I've done my ride-alongs, we have done property checks, and I think we could, maybe it's a matter of making that link on our website that says, are you leaving for vacation for 2 weeks? I mean, I can't tell you the number of times, and it's literally just you pull up, do a quick walk around. There's a list in the police department, so we already do that, and it'd just be a matter of educating the public that let us know, and we'll go and properties in town, I have to say, and some not so great ones, but our police are well aware of that, and even some of the houses they know that are already abandoned, I can tell you that we drive by regularly, and if there's anything different, they have stopped and done a check. So with that, I would make a motion that we accept and move forward I want to get the name right, the vacant building registration ordinance as proposed with a few, I know I had sent Britt some questions about on the application, the utilities seemed kind of muddy, and she was going to adjust that so it was a little clearer on exactly what we're looking for. So with that, I would like to make a motion to move this forward.
And that comes at the regular council meeting later on for final approval. Okay, motion by Counselor Johnson, is there support?
I would support, but for some further discussion.
Sure, support by Counselor Freely. Been further discussion, Counselor Freely.
You know, I understand the premise behind passing the ordinance for preservation and maintenance, as well as registration of buildings. There's a safety factor that's serious and significant, obviously. There's a lot of buildings in disrepair, and not to make this about myself again, but the reality is that throughout this city, and what I'm concerned about is, are we going to be overwhelming our resources to be able to really enforce what we're trying to enforce? Or are we really trying to enforce versus encourage? I guess I look at it from the standpoint of as a property owner that when there's a building preservation and maintenance code ordinance passed, it's to encourage me as a homeowner to make efforts to raise my building standards to a bar that's acceptable to people that are looking from the outside in. And that's a little irritating to me at times. And I'll tell you why. Like, for example, I was in negotiations for 25 to 30 years with the school district in anticipation of 2 of my properties being raised for parking lots. Therefore, I deferred maintenance, because why would I put $15,000 into a roof if in a year and a half the building's going to be torn down? And then over the course of time, I find out that now I have to change from steam to gas. And all of a sudden now there's another $40,000 on top of the $15,000 I need to put into the roof, and the other roof that's starting to be deteriorated. Point being, it adds up to the point where it's like cost prohibitive to people to be able to raise their building standards to that bar that we're expecting. And so I'm thinking that there are going to be people in this city that are going to want you to not be involved in their business with regard to their building because they're going somewhere and they don't want to hear from you as to where are they going, how long are you going to be gone, Do you want us to look after that? I'm just throwing this out there for conversation. It's not that I'm against any of this, because I understand the logic behind why we want this to happen in this community. It's certainly significant and serious and necessary. I don't deny that. But I think we have to take into consideration the sensitivities to our residents and our population that are strapped to be able to meet these expectations of our ordinances in town. And case in point, I have another friend that's like down in Chicago frequently helping his son build on his house and gets back up here as often as possible to continue the process of working on his building with only himself as the person that can do the labor, but gets smacked by the engineering department regularly with the blight notifications that you're not done with what we expected you to do, when he hasn't been able to acquire the resources and the materials and necessary for a single guy to get up there to do that kind of work. And so I sometimes feel that we're not sensitive as we need to be to the needs of our residents. And then I also heard from a resident the other day about why is the city not trimming trees? There's branches falling down onto our streets. We're having to drive around them. I'm having to go out there and pull those branches myself. Point I'm trying to make is I wonder if we're beginning to get to the point where we're going to be overwhelming our resources in terms of what we're trying to accomplish. And case in point, for example, Chris, I walk around town, it would be virtually impossible for our blight officer to stay up on everything that needs to be accomplished in keeping bushes off the sidewalks, overhanging branches off the sidewalks, et cetera, et cetera. Already I see that we're having expectations in this town that we're not capable of actually adhering to and addressing ourselves within the city. And so that's what I'm concerned about. I think it's important to have this kind of stuff in place. I do at times think, though, that we're moving, kind of creeping towards almost governmental overreach at times with regard to these ordinances. And I just want to caution us in terms of what our intent is. If our intent is to enforce, I don't think that's a good thing to do. If our intent is to persuade and encourage, I'm fine with that. So I want that kind of communication to be brought forth in this community, that these are the kinds of things that we're doing to encourage us to all kind of raise to a certain standard, but not because we can stick it to you with some kind of a fine if you're not. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I do support this, but now you kind of know where I stand.
So if you may, if I can, I appreciate you bringing that forward, and we as a city staff talking about this have been very sensitive and have that very much on the forefront. If we don't have a base to go by, then it's harder for us to try to enforce and make shift as we go. So we have to have some hard fast, so that we have that enforcement on the legal side, and then we have that paperwork side. And we're doing it today. We're going out and we're educating. We're trying to be pretty fair to our patrons. We understand in our community there's financial hardships, and we as a city aren't, our intent isn't to be financially hardship, but to respond to your friend that has this ongoing project, at what point does he need or she need or whoever, what point does that project get stalled out? And then it does become, and if we're not monitoring those things, and I get that, but there's also some responsibility on any property owner. And we're playing a lot of years of catch up here, and we realize that, and we're dealing with old buildings. And so it comes down to code enforcement with common sense, if you will. And I think we as the building official, Bill, myself, Britt, the city, with your backing, we've been out doing a lot of not just code enforcement, but marketing, economic development. We're sharing these routes for folks to get maybe assistance, grants, so forth. If maybe there's another building that we're purview to know that maybe is coming up to make some of those recommendations, or at least get them guided to a path of that contact person to do that. So I think we've been pretty fair, and our goal is to remain pretty fair, but it's for those that want to be a little more contestant or not compliant. We have to have this base in order to do our job appropriately.
And I understand it. And like case in point, for example, he can't get up 30 feet because he really can't afford to rent a scaffolding unit. But the guy that's calling in frequently to complain has one in his garage. So, I mean, in terms of that encouragement, can we not encourage neighbors like that are calling in to say, well, this guy's not done? Have you offered any assistance from across the alley with the equipment you could afford to assist him with? You know, I mean, I'd like to see that kind of encouragement in this city as well. Instead of people calling in and complaining, have you assisted your neighbor, helping him get that accomplished? So in any event, I don't disagree with any of this thing. I'm in favor of the preservation and maintenance code. I'm in favor of this as well. But I really think the way we communicate that and the way we market this, so to speak, has to be in terms of like encouraging all of us to raise the bar, so to speak, rather than we have enforcement capabilities that are going to make you do this, because it's not going to happen that way.
We're on the same page there.
And I think one of the issues that to just expound a little bit upon what Councilor Freely has indicated, you know, our goal should always be, and I think we've all talked about this, is to communicate, inform, assist, provide, and then for success, encourage. And then, if all that's been done and no compliance has been made, then you start, enforcement should always be the last resort. I mean, that's kind of the rule of thumb in even police work. Unless it's an emergency, that's the last resort moving forward. And the other piece is that we have taken some steps to help alleviate some of the blight officers' responsibilities, because that blight officer is busy. Okay, and the blight officer has a temporary assistant that helps as well. But we have assigned our Park and Rec director, Brian Silber, with the responsibility, if there's a complaint about trees that are being trimmed overhanging the branch, you call Park and Rec, they'll come over and trim the trees if they're over the boulevard. They take care of that. Case in point, on 13th Street, by that Sunset Edition, there was a house on the corner that's rarely ever used. It was overgrown, and it got compliance taken, never did anything about it. We sent the city over there, they cut all those hedges out, cleaned them all out. That was part of the blight thing, and that was done through Park and Rec. So I think that's a process moving forward. And it's just about communicating what the options that these individuals have. But I agree with you. Compliance is one thing, but you use all other communication methods to maintain, to gain compliance, to be reasonable, to give opportunities within, a reasonable period of time, and then take enforcement action only as a last resort. So I'm with you on that, Councilor Freely. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of things are going through my mind right now. One of those things, without belaboring the whole conversation, but I'd like to address how are landlords viewed? Are they viewed as business owners? Do most of them have LLCs, or is it just a private person renting and then reporting that rental income on their taxes? And where I'm going with this is the IRRB has maybe expressed some different programming options. So instead of penalizing or enforcing, you can enforce, but also give them maybe some funding or financing options. So how is that treated, or is it just on an individual basis? Because if it's a business and it's treated as such, I feel that the IRRB and the City of Virginia could potentially enter into a conversation going forward for some of those.
Brett, to answer that one for you.
I'm sorry.
No, there's quite a few LLCs, but most of them are private.
Most of them are
Yeah, if it's a
private.
duplex, a lot of them don't do LLC, they just privately. But there are quite a few that are 2 or more rental units, and so they would be an LLC. And Chris and Bill do a great job as inspectors when they do enter these places, of letting them know, like he mentioned, enforcing with common sense, letting them know these are the things that you absolutely have to fix, but there may be some funding if you contact the HRA or BRIT or AOA, we can try to help you. And so I get numerous phone calls saying, I talked to Chris Clark, can you help me with something?
And I really compliment you on that. I think that's fantastic. I really do. I think that piece is really helpful. I think the piece that if you're not an LLC and you are an individual, that there may not be quite as much, or maybe through HOA, but I did have a conversation with Commissioner Phillips, and he's interested in hearing maybe feedback from Vita or some of us counselors going forward, even as we do maybe some vacant building, and I know that's on our list next. But if the bar is too high and the comps are too low, And why would you put a roof on? You know, I mean, I'm following with what you're saying there. But to maybe have some funding or financial relief for those building owners to be able to tap into getting up to code or getting up to that. Maybe we could, you know, put forth a little bit more teamwork to see who we could bring as more players to the table, and potential, you know, programming that, in terms of financing or grants or however that looks like, what that would look like together. And I think that would be helpful.
Thank you. Real quickly, we have, and to go back to what Councilor Philip was saying, you know, when we get to this next phase after the vacant ordinance, once we get a rental corners, there's going to be a need for more staff, there's going to be a need for, there's no way that they can do this on their own. There's going to be a need for us to look at more staff as we generate revenue in order to provide that staff, and it's not necessarily going to be through fines and enforcement. Actually, it has to be through some other means. So we'll have to look at that. But years ago, when we first put the preservation code together, I mean, it was a long, arduous process. Lots of meetings, took a long period of time, almost 2 years. Part of the rental code component was part of this property maintenance preservation code. And to answer Julianne's question, there was units of 2 or more, and there was individual homes that rented their basement and rented their upstairs, but they resided at that place. So there was going to be a difference in how those rental codes are being considered. And fortunately, this vacant building registration orders wouldn't apply to those people that might rent. They might live they might live here, and they rent their upstairs and a basement, and they have 2 or 3 people living there, but they actually own the residence, they live there, so that's a different kind of an issue for registration moving forward. But this is for vacant buildings as we move forward. And so if it's a vacant building, that means it can't be rented, or they can't find a renter, or it's not in the condition where it's rentable. And so the things that you outlined, Councilor Paulson, with some help with the ITRP moving forward, and in the communication piece, trying to help people be successful is important. So thank you. Councilor Bearable.
I've got a couple of questions here. One of them is on the stay and pending appeal process. You got a 10-day time limit on this, it looks like, from what I'm reading, but with the snail mail now, because you have to notify them in written form, and it's taken forever to get anything by mail, 5 days or longer. If you go from here to Minneapolis, you got a lot of absentee owners of these buildings that aren't even close to living in Virginia or the area. How are you going to satisfy that enforcement proceedings if they can't even get the notices in their appeal process back to you within that 10 days? The mail is horrible. You mail something now, takes at least 5 days from Minneapolis to get up here now. It's not fast anymore because you don't have any. They've dumped the Duluth mail thing. They've dumped everything. It's all going to the Twin Cities right now. I think you have to have a little bit more, how do you want to say it, relief on that 10 days, because you may not get that stuff back from for an appeal process. So you got to do something in that appeal process, because it goes to the appeal officer, whoever that may be. I'm guessing it's the building inspector at this point, but I'm not sure who that is. And then there's appeal from there to the council. So I would just like to see that looked at a little bit. One of the things that's coming, and I've talked to Britt about this, and this is one thing I'm going to be really tough on as we move this forward. We need to change our whole zoning ordinance in this community for rental properties and other things, so they can't keep inundating the whole community and restrict the zoning. And that can be done legally, believe me, because other cities have done it. And this is part of the next step, too, we need to look at. It's not for now, but I agree we need to do some of these things that are in this ordinance, but I just like to somehow that there's a little more leniency if somebody can't get back to her, they don't receive their notice in the mail, that you're doing enforcement on their property. As I'd be awful PO'd if I didn't get notification if I had a piece of property. And I appreciate, though, you're helping people find some dollars. There are people out there that cannot afford to do these things except piecemeal. And when you give them some of these short time frames, they just don't have the money to hire somebody. It's so expensive to hire outside individuals. You need to do, and I agree with Gary on that. You know, I've hired stuff out and I know how expensive it is. So I try to do as much as I can, even in my own home, and I can afford to hire out. But some of these people in this community cannot. They've got to do it themselves. So that's my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
What would you ask for?
And I think that.
A reasonable, I'm sorry, what would you suggest, Charlie? 15 days or 20 days? What would you feel better with?
I don't care what it is, but with the way
longer
the
than
mail
10?
is, because we have it specifically in there that it's for written notice, which you have to legally do.
Right, right.
So I'm just concerned that the way this mail is, I've had stuff that's taken 10 days to get
Right,
to me.
right.
So
So if you'd be amicable to 15, that would give them
that's fine
a
with
little more
me.
time?
You know, give them a little bit more time if we possibly could. And I don't think another 5 days is going to hurt anything in the
We'll need to
enforcement
reflect
process.
that with the rest of the codes to make
Yeah,
sure
we
that
can-
mirrors.
Yeah, do that. That would satisfy me, okay?
Well, I think that part of this portion of it is that when you give the notice, you know, it's not a notice that you have to have it done within 15 days. Well, I mean, but what I would suggest if to look at, that, you know, you get the notice. You got to get things done within 15 days or whatever. If you don't have that, what we do now, if this is appropriate or not, Britt, I ask, you look for your guidance in that regard, because I know you've done a lot of research, is that come up, within that period of time, you got to meet with the code compliance officer, which is the billing official, whatever, and then come up with a plan on, you know, what you're going to do to fix it. Maybe they'll give you another 30 days or whatever. As long as you have a plan moving forward to repair it, and you can show that plan, you know, that gives you an additional time. Is that feasible?
That does happen.
Yeah,
And
so, right?
the section that Charlie is referring to is the appeal process. So this would be after Chris or Bill or somebody gave them an order. If they don't like it, they can come back to the council, but they have to have a written appeal within 15 days of the time they got the notice of the violation.
Okay, all right.
So,
Yeah, because it's 10 days in there now. And
It's 10, yeah.
Maybe that's enough.
and you're correct, the mail is slow. It is a very, very long process, and this gives them a little more time to get it back to us.
But if it says, maybe it is okay 10 days, because it says, I reread this, and maybe I read it wrong. It says, within 10 days of receiving the written notice, they have time. So they have 10 days after they actually receive the notice, but who knows when they receive it? That's the other issue. So I don't know how we send those things out, registered mail.
Certified mail,
Certified
return,
mail,
receive
okay.
requested.
Okay, then that's okay.
Sign for it.
I guess we can leave it at the 10, Brett.
Okay, thank you.
I misread that a little bit, so I apologize.
Thank you. So it's been moved and supported to move forward with the vacant building ordinance registration initiative. Is there any further discussion before we take a vote? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next item on the agenda is the business fire occupancy ordinance. And what this ordinance is, we've kind of compared it to a business license fee, so that you would register any business you have in the city of Virginia with the city, in the fire department. And so we would know who is in business. And I think the case that that Fire Marshal Clark references all the time is there was one business located here that within 1 year, they've moved 3 times. And so when they call and say, I'm calling about my Knox box, he's like, well, where are you at? Because we have no idea where you moved to now. You've moved 3 times. And so this is kind of our approach to try to identify which businesses are located in town. Chris, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, so the business registry is, it's a multifold. The police kind of keeps a record of just contacts. We have Knox boxes, but not every business has a Knox box. We enacted an ordinance 5 years ago, I believe, 4 years ago, for the Knox box to start requiring that. And so it's been a transition. So we don't always know what buildings are actually being vacated as a business, or if it's actually being occupied as a business, or if it's in transition. So this is a way that we can go in and know who's occupying these spaces, as well as making sure that they have a fire inspection, because it hasn't been required in the past for these buildings. So they're coming in and doing business, and if they're not the right occupancy rated for what type of business they're doing, and it just kind of keeps everybody honest and gives us a safe environment to move forward. And as Britt said, there's many other grants out there that if they're looking at purchasing a building, we've been going out and helping these folks assessing the properties, and they've asked, can you come and do this? And we've been doing that at a gratis thing as city officials in trying to paint that road. So as they engage this gives us a foundation to make sure that our checks and balances throughout the city are being maintained on both the fire code and registry and keys and however, and that would be, again, shared information between
Is
our
this,
entities.
is this type of application consistent with other cities, or is this something new?
No, this is something that's consistent with other cities.
Thank you. Councilor Paulson.
I really want to commend you for taking this on. It's a big thing to tackle, so I appreciate both. I mean, I think I've asked when I first started, could we please do a business registry, and that was 3 years ago. So I mean, I know it's a lot of work and a long process, but I really feel like it's going to help the police department, the fire department. It's going to help a business entering into our community and a business exiting out of our community. And then I just wanted to, I don't know if I read everything as thoroughly as I probably should have, but is on the exit side of that where they are going to vacate the building, do we have requirements or strict requirements as to how they can leave their windows and their signage? Is that in there? I'm sorry, I don't know that I read it.
Signage is in there, where if their
Signage was in there.
building's gonna be vacant, their sign has to be taken down, and if they don't, we have the right to then take it down.
I believe it says in there's about 30-day window for them to have the property as it is, and then they need to make a decision whether it's going to be rented or it's a vacant.
And then at that point, and there's just some case in point vacant buildings that we've had in the past that have had curtains or newspaper or things like that. Does this give you the right tool then to be able to go and do what is needed to be done to change that so it doesn't look so blighted on our main street? Or is that again a privacy issue?
That comes into some privacy, but if we know who's doing that, at least maybe we can contact them and make some other suggestions due to those safety factors.
Even permissions, if we know who owns these buildings and who's responsible, we could even call and say, you know, Revive is willing to come paint your window. Can we come paint your window? And
So I would propose that, and again, I'm going to have to reread everything really carefully because I know we had a long conversation on it, and but I think part of some frustration out there is when building owners exit their buildings, there is not a specific exit that our city is requiring of them. And I think that, not to set the bar too high there in terms of enforcement or compliance, that's not my intention. My intention is to maintain a certain level of non-blighted buildings and a non-blighted percentage along Chestnut and Second in the corridor. So if we had some sort of an exit, do you understand where I'm coming from?
I do, and I think that we have
Like a
that in there
checklist.
that basically is, you know, you secure it, we still have those points of contact. They have, whoever owns a property, whether that business is renting that space or if it's that property in general, we have that address where they have to make it, I guess, if you will, curb appealing, whether it's Second or Chestnut or out in another zoned area. So I think we have some of that, we just haven't got it tweaked into a more formal, and I think it's one of these things we need to just gingerly walk into and address as this unfolds.
Is this something then that we're approving specific today and will not be able to be changed or amended?
it at any time. It's an ordinance, so with 2 readings, we could change it at any time.
Yep. Thank you for that.
And if you have suggestions prior to it, it'll go to the first reading next week and then the second reading at the end of October.
Be my suggestion.
Yeah, and so then if we have changes between now and the October 22nd, we certainly can add them in there. There is a clause in here that anytime it's changes status, you have to notify us, and I think we just need to including vacancy.
What that is.
Yes, that vacancy is a status change and we need to be notified as well.
Thank you.
And then just to follow up real quickly with what our city administrator has indicated, there are volunteer organizations. My buddy lives in Denver, Colorado, right outside Lakewood, in an area. And, he's on these boards, review, and he serves in these revitalization areas. So he says that what they've done, like we have Revive Virginia, we have the Virginia Foundation, and they have volunteers. So when a building gets vacant, they make contact with the building owner, and they say, we'll cover your storefront, so you don't see anything, so, because downtown is horrible. They'll cover your store with something that's appealing, that's acceptable that the city has agreed to, or whatever, if it's Revive or whatever they call it out there, and that really has done a lot to make it a more aesthetically pleasing empty space until it gets filled. So those are really, Councilor Paulson.
I think that's fantastic. That's where I think I'd like to see it move forward. Although I know when Joe Gurton was here and he really did try to get that initiative, there was some red tape or maybe some roadblocks. So if we could loosen that or lighten that somehow, and to be able to maybe help facilitate the building owner being contacted by Revive, or some way to partner and marry that together, I think that would make a lot more sense.
We've had some of those discussions, putting this
Okay.
together of, what can we hand these folks and say, here's some resources for you. So we're working on the same page, and I think that's the important thing here. Also think of these business occupancies. As we look downtown, we might have apartments, and then we also look at the business. The business registry is addressing a business. Rental is going to be addressing the rental portions of those buildings. So
there'll
if they're
be two
mixed use, so there's two separate, we're talking two separate things.
And I think to further a little bit of my concern, or where I was going with that is, so when buildings are treated as blight or unoccupied buildings, and then they're sold, so they're short sold, that brings all the rest of the comps down for anyone located near that area for either their financing, trying to obtain future loans or funding going forward, or selling their building, that a bank won't finance that building because of the comps in the area. So I believe that if we have a little bit more ability to have some control over those blight situations, that is going to impact the comps in the future going forward. And I feel like that's really an important
They're all
way.
great examples. We run across them every day, and it's how do we track down these folks, this ownership, this bank? And if we don't have, again, this platform to work off of, it's very hard for us. So if we have something, it's going to help this process in the greater picture.
Mr. Freely.
Well, again, I see together we can eliminate code violations, be partners in safety, but anything that needs to be done is going to cost them money, and it's going to give butterflies in the stomach of these people that already are up to their eyeballs in potential debt, So again, I think and I can't think of anybody better to be able to bring this forth than you. I've seen you at work, and I like the way that you convey messages, but it kind of this is what we can do for you, rather than this is what you have to do for us kind of thing. And I think if you convey it in that way, there would be a lot more reception to your presence. And just a quick question, is knob and tube wiring still functional and allowed, or does it have to be?
It is, but if there's certain percentages or upgrades that have to be done, now we have to bring it up to today's codes. So that's where we look at some of these specific grants.
Given that some of these buildings are turn-of-the-century buildings and still have that kind of infrastructure, there is potential significant costs that will be incurred by business owners that could be a deterrent to them continuing business in town. So, we really have to, how we approach this is going to be critical.
We realize this is walking on glass, and we're really trying to do this right and move forward.
Right, and I trust you to be the person that can do that for us, to be honest with you. That's why I would be in favor of this. But we do have to convey it in a way in which this is what we can do for you rather than to you.
And maybe those are things that, if we have some identifiers out there, I think that's part of us coming to you as a council as a whole, having Britt as that a point person that we can help bring those types of grants from IRRB or these other stakeholders in for community risk reduction. If we can start maintaining these buildings, then they're going to be viable even longer. And if we don't, we're back into the place we're at today of a lot of demise. And those are tough decisions to make.
Thank you. We're going to need a motion to move forward with this if possible. Is there any council would like to entertain a motion to move? Councilor Paulson, motion to move, is there support? Support by Councilor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? I'm sorry, Councilor Johnson.
How, as a city, do we help manage this with our city buildings? We have a few here and there. Where does that fit in this?
It's hard.
Because if we're going to be good examples, we should have a plan to say, all right, we have 2 buildings downtown. This is what we're going to do. We own. The county has given us a property that we need to take care of. So I guess I don't want that answered here. I just want that to be up front and center, that we have buildings as a city that we need to be responsible for. And we're going to have to figure that out moving forward as well.
Sure, if we have code upgrades, we better be compliant.
We are not exempt.
Correct.
Okay. So it's been moved and supported to move this forward. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed, motion carries. Thank you very much, Chris.
Thank you.
What we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking a short break. We'll cut the feed off until we return. So if somebody would like to cut that feed off, we'll take a really short break, and then we'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.